pergunta, são duas, na verdade, mas são ligadas. Pode ir falando. Uma primeira, né, eu queria saber se a Judith Butler ela tem uma preocupação, quando escreve, em pensar que ela é lida tanto por acadêmicos quanto por militantes.
When you write, do you take into account your words that you're writing for the academia and for the lay public as well?
E como nós estamos no Brasil, um pouco ligado a isso, é se a teoria queer dialoga com os estudos pós-coloniais, né?
In Brazil, the queer theory dialogues with post-colonial studies.
E uma última pergunta, né, para encerrar, é que a teoria, os livros da Butler questionam muito, né, categorias de identidade que restringem a vida das pessoas. Ela fala em solidariedades invisíveis, como o Richard até comentou hoje pela manhã.
Era um pouquinho, porque eu preciso traduzir, você
tá
falando um monte de coisa. And her second question is that as teorias dela criticam...
Que ela fala das solidariedades invisíveis e de desconstruir categorias...
You speak about the visible solidarities.
E desconstruir categorias que limitam as pessoas.
You create the categories that limit people.
Que são categorias que são normas que afetam a todos, não é uma questão de homossexuais, heterossexuais. Se ela poderia comentar um pouco, né, essas questões, essas solidariedades e como desfazer normatizações sem construir novas normatizações.
If you could speak about the solidarity and how to undo a situation and create different ones.
Basically about creating solidarities and instead of creating more categories that we will divide people.
Yes. Obrigada.
Do you think a few words in stopping or I take notes?
I say a few words and stop. Okay. Obrigada.
Acho que não está ligado.
Now it's working. Hello.
Yep.
Well, thank you very much for your questions. They are good questions. When I write, I do not know who will read me. So it's not that I imagine the academic world or imagine a public world that is distinct. I write and I see who shows up.
Primeiro, muito obrigada pelas suas perguntas, são boas perguntas. E eu queria responder a primeira que, quando eu escrevo, eu não sei quem vai ler. Se é o público acadêmico ou se é o público em geral. Eu escrevo e depois eu vejo quem aparece.
Of course, my writing is difficult, and for many people it does require a familiarity with academic language and academic texts.
Claro que eu escrevo de uma forma difícil para muitas pessoas. Isso requer uma familiaridade com o texto e a terminologia usada nos meios acadêmicos.
At the same time, I would say that my work in queer theory has always been responding to a broader social movement.
E por outras também eu queria dizer que, ao mesmo tempo, o meu olhar sobre o mundo queer sempre respondeu a um universo mais abrangente.
And I also am very pleased to discover that activists and artists outside of the academy have found my work to be useful.
E eu também fico contente de ver que ativistas e artistas fora do mundo acadêmico também acharam o meu trabalho útil.
And the same with legal scholars and psychologists.
E a mesma coisa acontece com os estudiosos na área jurídica e psicólogos.
The aspect of queer theory that I value the most, and maybe queer studies more generally, is the dimension of alliance. And I know that Richard Miskolci also, I believe, shares this view. And queer is not an identity. I mean, you can say, I am queer, but it is very odd to say I am queer.
Eu também queria dizer que a teoria queer é uma dimensão de uma aliança. E eu sei que o Richard compartilha desse ponto de vista comigo. E queer não é exatamente uma identidade. Eu posso dizer, eu sou queer, mas sou um pouco estranho.
I think queer is a way of naming a movement that takes a different direction than what is expected. So to belong to a queer movement is to be contesting dominant norms and the process of normalization that makes it so difficult for all kinds of people, lesbian, gay, bisexual, intersex, trans, to live more openly and easily and without fear in the public world.
O queer, na verdade, é um movimento numa direção contrária e que contesta as normas dominantes. E é difícil hoje para os gays, homos, trans, viverem na situação atual. Então, esse movimento é para que a vida deles se torne mais fácil e a sua interação com o mundo atual mais fácil.
I would say gays, lesbians, bisexual,
gays, lésbicos, bissexuais,
intersex, and trans.
E trans, todos eles.
But also sex workers.
Trabalhadoras sexuais também.
Yes.
Trabalhadores e trabalhadoras sexuais também.
Yes.
Né?
Quer dizer, important set of alliances.
É um conjunto de alianças.
I want to add this though. In recent years, I have felt that queer activism is most effective when it makes alliances with those who are struggling against economic precarity and political dispossession.
Nos últimos anos, eu tenho visto que esse movimento funciona melhor quando nós fazemos alianças com aqueles que lutam contra as igualdades econômicas. Economic inequalities and
precarity.
E precariedades em geral.
Precariedade. And I think, in fact, that the idea of alliance that is so important for queer has to continue to expand, so that we can build a left that is opposed to accelerating economic inequalities, that is opposed to racism, that is opposed to homophobia, that is opposed to sexism. I think it is a way of thinking about coalition in all of its complexity and in all of its difficulty.
Se você me permite, para ir mais rápido, ela está dizendo que o que importa é pensar no queer como uma possibilidade de construção de alianças, né, que sejam positivas contra a homofobia, contra desigualdades econômicas, contra essas diversas formas de precariedade que marcam a sociedade contemporânea.
Good. I think that's it.
Posso falar? Mas posso perguntar em inglês? Pode. Okay. Hi, Professor Butler. My name is Carol. I'm an education reporter for G1. It's a website. My question is regarding, I don't know if you're aware.
Yes,
that
I am.
In Brazil we have, I think everybody asked you that before. Okay. I would just like to know if you have any comments on the importance of having gender being part of the education plans in schools and in the school systems locally and nationally.
Yes. I think this. I know that in São Paulo, in particular, that I believe, is it gender and sexual diversity, which was taken out of the educational plan? Is that correct?
Foi em São Paulo que gênero, diversidade sexual foram tirados do currículo escolar?
Okay, and it seems to me that there are two problems here, as I understand it, right? One is there are conservatives who believe that you learn about sex, and maybe you learn about gender, but maybe you don't learn about gender. You learn about sex and sexuality in the family, and in the family or in a religious setting. So that's one question. What belongs to religion and a private setting, and what belongs to a public educational policy? But then there's a second question that I've noted, and I may be wrong, I'm just learning this for the first time, which is that the category of gender is very contested, and there are those who claim that if you accept the category of gender, then you deny the category of sex. And if you deny the category of sex, you deny the Bible, which says that there are two sexes, or you deny science, which says ostensibly there are two sexes, but really science is much more complex than that. Science is clear that sex designation is a very difficult practice, right? And it doesn't always work. And they fight among themselves, the scientists. Anyway, for the purposes of defending the Bible, some Christians will invoke an idea of science in which the difference between the sexes is absolute. Now, I don't think gender implies the denial of sex. It does not imply the denial of sex. It simply opens up the question, how do we know sex? How do we name it? What effect, through what frameworks do we understand it? Do we understand it through religion? Do we understand it through science? Which science? Do we understand it through the sciences? Do we understand it through literature? How do we understand this? How many different frameworks are there for understanding what sex is? The category of sex has changed over history. The idea of what sex implies has changed over history. Sometimes, in some parts of history, in some parts of the world, what your sex is tells you in advance what your job will be, right? Or what your sex is tells you in advance what your personality will be. And other people say, no, that's not true. So there are a set of contests about how to interpret what we might call the sexed body. The name for that set of contests is gender studies. Gender studies, where you can ask those questions. It's where you can learn to think critically about the problem.
Can I just ask a follow-up?
Yes, sorry.
Considering this is a 10-year plan, is the absence of the gender word in the plans, is it going to have an impact on how our society is going to be, how the next generation we're going to educate is going to be like?
I need to tell something. If you allow me to say that em português, né? Não, a supressão não significa, o MEC, né, o Ministério da Educação já expediu uma nota dizendo que os planos de educação têm que seguir o respeito aos direitos humanos. O que ocorreu foi uma coisa superficial, a supressão da palavra, porque esses grupos fundamentalistas não aceitam a existência disso. Agora, é tapar o sol com a peneira, né? Essas questões existem e a forma geral de condução da educação exige o respeito aos direitos humanos. Isso não foi retirado dos planos e, portanto, essas discussões ocorrerão na sala de aula.
Não, eu entendo. É que o debate é justamente assim. Se a gente não consegue nem colocar a palavrinha no plano, imagina a hora de realmente aplicar uma política na escola ou no sistema escolar. Entendeu? Se a gente tem esse debate, era mais ou menos isso.
Well, first of all, let me just make two remarks briefly, because I don't want to intervene in your national policy and debate.
Please do.
No. You do not need the intellectual from the north to come down here and tell you what is true. No. But let us say this, that this is now a debate. It's been taken out of the educational plan. Now, there's going to be a fight for it to be put back into the educational plan. Maybe they win. Maybe they win, maybe they lose. In other words, you are part of an historically evolving debate on this issue. This is not the end of the story. There will be activists, there will be educators, there will be international organizations, there will be all kinds of people who oppose this exclusion. And they will fight to have it re-included. And then the question will be, how is it re-included? Okay, so don't mistake this moment in an historical process for the final end. It's not the final end. It can't be the final end. But secondly, you know, gender, if it's the case that people do interpret their sexed existence in the world very differently, right? And that happens very differently within different cultures. It happens differently within different religions. If you ask what sex means, or why it's important, if we ask someone in the church why it's important, or if we ask someone in my synagogue why it's important, or if we ask someone on the street, we're going to learn something very different. Now the question is, do we want to educate our children, or everybody else's children, to understand that this is a highly debatable topic, that there are different points of view, and that they need to consider the complexity of the world, culturally and religiously, historically, in order to understand this issue. It doesn't mean they have to take a political point of view. I am for gender, I'm against gender. I don't understand that. I don't understand that as a debate. It seems like gender is something we deal with all the time. How you live your sexed body in the world, how it's interpreted, to what laws it's subjected, how it's organized, what power or freedom you have to make it as you need. That whole complex issue is something people are living every day. When they ask, what kind of woman do I want to be? They assume that you can, to some degree, participate in the making of your gender. What kind of man do I want to be? Do I want to be a man who brutalizes women and kills? No, I don't. Okay, that means you think your gender can be refashioned in an ethical way. Right? That means that the category of man is being remade through public debate. This is good. Why would it not be good? Sorry.
Perfect.
Hi, Judith.
Yes. Hi.
My name is Carolina. I'm here on behalf of a website called Opera Mundi, and I want to ask you about Israel.
Okay.
Because since you're a great critical voice to Israel's policies against Palestinian people, and especially regarding the attack by settlers against the Palestinian family, in which the family unfortunately was killed, and then a few days later there was an attack on a gay pride parade in Jerusalem. So how do you see, I don't know, from the perspective of the Jewish community, Jewish American community, do you see a shift in perspectives regarding Israel's policies against Palestinian people in the US? Or do you see that coming, or how could that come by somehow in the next few years?
Well, let me say this. You know, of course, your question is very interesting and important, but it raises perhaps a larger question. What is the role of the the U.S. Jewish community in influencing the state policies of Israel? And, you know, there's a big debate on that. Some people say, oh, American Jews are very, very important. Others say, no, American Jews will just follow whatever Israel says. And they go round and round on this debate. My view right now is it is important for me as someone who grew up in a Jewish community, and I have very strong Jewish commitments as an adult. to become part of an organization, Jewish Voice for Peace, which is, interestingly enough, the fastest growing Jewish organization in the United States. Okay, and it is American Jews for the most part, although it has international allies, who are fighting for the demilitarization of Israel, the end of the occupation, and equal rights for Jewish and non-Jewish inhabitants of the entire land. So we have grown in numbers. I used to feel very isolated. I could barely speak. I didn't know if my family would continue to speak with me. But now we're stronger, and we become more of a voice. It's important. There are other such groups, maybe not as left as mine, but good groups like J Street, and they are having more of an influence in U.S. Jewish policy making and policy and public opinion. But in the end, I don't know if the United States or the Jewish community in the United States has that much power. I think, in fact, that the international sanctions that have begun to emerge, especially against corporations that are settled in the West Bank, against the human rights violations, not just the killings of Palestinian civilians, but the bombings of civilians in Gaza. It seems to me that the international institutions like the International Criminal Court and the United Nations both have started to act much more courageously to name and oppose the widespread human rights violations. So I continue to be a little bit hopeful. I see evidence of important Jewish-Palestinian solidarity. It's very important for me to be part of that as well. And I think, in general, we're also seeing that other anti-colonial struggles throughout the world have identified Palestine as a colonized people, as a colonized land. And so there are now alliances, I think, among many groups globally that are seeking to reconceptualize the problem in Palestine as one of continuing settler colonialism. I think if we start to use that language and we link it with other kinds of colonial conditions in the world, that also will be very important.